Good morning. When I was about 14 years old, without a single profound thought in my head, other than boys, that is, I told my father, "Daddy, when you die, all I want are your books and papers." This from a person who failed miserably at history and in her rebellious years refused to go to university, even if they would have had me. In retrospect, I realize now that I instinctively knew their intrinsic value. Certainly that giddy teenager had no conception of what to do with the material. I only knew I had to have it. I had always wondered how it was that my father made little of my academic failures. He would never divulge his dreams for my future, never wanting me to feel lacking. Years later, I found out. A researcher brought to my attention a draft of his autobiography, which contained the following reference to my mother, the love of his life, who died at the age of 28. She had a native intelligence, uncorrupted by a university education. Now, irony of all ironies, I am the founder and curator of the Eric Williams Memorial Collection, Research Library, Archives and Museum, EWMC, a vast historical archive on deposit with the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago. With its 3 physical campuses in Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, and Jamaica, as well as a virtual open campus, the EWMC is UWI's largest research collection. It's jewel in the crown, as Professor Brereton has it. The first of its kind and a model for the English-speaking Caribbean. According to Professor Anthony Bryan, Emeritus, University of Miami, it is perhaps the only historical collection of which Trinidad and Tobago can be proud. I fancy my father's role was to create history. Mine is to preserve it. I have therefore devoted the 38 years since his passing to the propagation of his vision, about which I am equally enthusiastic, formulating and implementing the collection's myriad projects, all with the help and advice of the UWI Alma Jordan Library, where it is situated, and numerous international scholars, whom I am privileged to call my friends. I am convinced that it is only in the full glare of dispassionate research and investigation that Eric Williams's true legacy will be understood and appreciated. With the EWMC now at the world's disposal, writers, researchers, historians, and students can and have utilized its resources to create new lenses through which to view both Williams's scholarly and political accomplishments, as well as his failures. It promotes scholarship, education at all levels, dissent even, which is critical to its academic underpinnings and the sober and unvarnished writing of history. The chips will fall where they may, and some long-held opinions of my father, both positive and those less so, may either be affirmed or negated. His achievements, however, whether as scholar or statesman, will continue to lend definition and depth to the Caribbean community he so deeply cared for. In a glittering ceremony 21 years ago, one that was bipartisan and national in scope and televised nationwide, former U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell inaugurated the Eric Williams Memorial Collection, Research Library, Archives and Museum. The very next year, UNESCO named it to its prestigious Memory of the World Register, lauding the collection's documentary heritage. Over 7,000 books and journals constitute my father's personal and eclectic library, covering a wide variety of disciplines: philosophy, religion, history, economics, politics, education, music, and art. While some rare books enhance its inherent value, its greatest strength is in the area of African and African-American texts and in the broad sweep of Caribbean history, both multilingual and comprehensive. The emphasis not only focused on the Black West Indies, but on the various groups and their racial components, Amerindian, European, East Indian, that truly reflect the Pan-Caribbean community. But the EWMC is far more than simply a repository for Williams's published and unpublished works, drafts of his writings, research notes, a miscellany of conference and policy reports, historical documents, newspaper clippings, personal and official correspondence. According to retired UWI history professor Brinsley Samaru, who has just edited Williams's final work, soon to be published by UWI Press, the Williams papers prove that he was a meticulous chronicler and keeper of snippets of information. He regularly had recorded the speeches of opponents and marked off sections for later rebuttal. He collected information on unemployment, crime, foreign relations, and education. These ideas he would then distill in the crucible of his historical mind and craft them into well-documented, compelling presentations. Quite often, he wrote and then rewrote his speeches, leaving the various versions behind so that we can now trace the evolution of his thought. While the EWMC's library and archives are largely responsible for a resurgence of interest in the man and his intellectual and political contributions, it is the collection's museum that has piqued the curiosity of all those who visit, the general public included, and that speaks to the soul of a nation. Displaying photographs and memorabilia in the chronological order of his life, from representing QRC and his Oxford College in football — he was also an athlete — and love letters to my mother, to Queen Elizabeth II's message of regret at his impending 1973 retirement from office. The museum also contains a three-dimensional replica of Williams's private study. All these artifacts speak to a more complete picture of Eric Williams, the man, rather than the myth. Says Helenise Paul, they have enlivened history and challenged the intellectual capacities of the thousands of students who have visited the museum over the years and who have offered heartfelt testimonials. Keep this signature. I have been inspired to accomplish even greater heights for T&T and the Caribbean. I was Keisha Lewis, a first-year UWI student. I vow to defend your promise and to honor our people. Leslie Paul, Trinidad and Tobago high schooler. Thank you for treasuring what is really ours. Kimberly Correa, Trinidad and Tobago high schooler. I stand here waiting for him to return. Regika Barker, St. Vincent high schooler. This then is an open invitation to all, both presenters and public, to take time during the next 2 days to visit our museum. There is a sign-up sheet at the welcome desk, which will facilitate your tour. But the EWMC also runs a number of programs in the Caribbean that reward excellence, and we are even establishing a community service project entitled Baby Think It Over to attempt to stem the tide of teen and preteen pregnancies in Trinidad and Tobago. A potential UWI History Department graduate program in Heritage Studies with a 4-week practicum in the EWMC is in the works, as is an online bibliography of the more than 1,000 Williams speeches, documents, lectures, books, and publications. We encourage more students to choose the EWMC as the topic of their BA Caribbean Studies thesis, and we have partnered with Miami, Florida's largest public university in showcasing the annual Eric Williams Memorial Lecture, of which there have been 19. In 2007, we established an Eric Williams School Bags Essay Competition in 17 Caribbean countries, and we are so gratified to boast that its first winner is now the Bennett Bosky Fellow in Atlantic Studies at Oxford University, Dr. Connell Peters, who is presenting at this symposium that celebrates the 75th anniversary of Eric Williams' seminal work, Capitalism and Slavery. Although published by the University of North Carolina Press in 1944, and they are interested in being designated the publisher of destination for all his works, this book has never been out of print. A couple of years ago, it was translated into its 8th and 9th foreign language, Turkish and Korean, with both the Spanish and Portuguese editions being reissued after some 40 years. Thus, as arguably the intellectual basis for reparations, capitalism and slavery continues to claim a currency that appears hardly likely to abate anytime soon. In all that I have outlined, the EWMC's goal is nothing less than the institutionalization of a nation's historical memory, a not inconsiderable feat in the Third World, given the scant attention routinely paid to it. Our mission gives life and meaning to Eric Williams's words that history is not a record of battles and politicians, dates and events, or even of the follies and foibles of mankind, but rather a record of the development of humanity, of life and of society in all their various manifestations. The Eric Williams Memorial Collection, Research Library, Archives, and Museum is committed to preserving just that by using the EWMC as a core around which to encourage and promote academic integrity, analysis, and argument. I have deliberately outlined my work at the EWMC simply to emphasize my personal odyssey from intransigent and disappointing high schooler to ardent admirer, immensely proud and committed daughter of Eric Williams. Was he sometimes difficult? Yes. Could he be arrogant with his political foes? Yes. Did he make mistakes? Yes. I doubt I'll be here in 2044, but I am here today to assert that Eric Williams, as a man of somewhat short stature, was too big to be small. When Williams came to power in 1956, there were a total of 15 secondary schools nationwide, accounting for a mere 14,024 students, with only 236 eligible to attend on a non-paying basis. Armed then with his watchwords to educate is to emancipate, by 1986 an additional 80 secondary schools and 2 technical colleges had been constructed, with a new total of some 150,000 students attending secondary school gratis. By then, and with a technically skilled population, our national literacy rate was a staggering 95%. Social welfare was also a beneficiary of his vision, to wit, book and uniform grants, a school feeding program, free bus passes for students and senior citizens, old age pension, food subsidies and food stamps, low-income housing, grants to charitable organizations, a rent restriction bill, health care, and prescription drug funding, etc. There was also sizable expenditure in the provision of water, electricity, telecommunications, major arterial roads, and a well-cultivated airline route structure. The ill wind that blew somebody some good, as Williams termed the energy crisis of the early 1970s, ensured that his government could harness the oil and natural gas that the country possessed in abundance in order to establish downstream industries. And these eventually allowed Trinidad and Tobago to become the world's second largest producer of ammonia and the leading exporter of natural gas to the United States. Nevertheless, Williams was always mindful that, as he said, development has a face, and that is the face of man. Development must therefore cater for the total needs of man. Not all of the above policies were implemented as efficiently as they might have been, and some of the citizenry took blatant advantage of them. Nonetheless, they constituted the Williams government's adherence to a clause in Trinidad and Tobago's constitution which requires the material resources of the community being so distributed as to subserve the common good. When Eric Williams visited several African countries in 1964, he was outraged by the egregious puffery of many of its leaders who, as he said, exhibited an almost divine right to rule. He viewed the propensity of leaders to memorialize their achievements via statues, naming of buildings and streets after themselves as completely inappropriate. The ostentation, the massive waste of public funds was scandalous, and in one of the characterizations in his many letters to the cabinet, he deemed the practice a positive invitation to disorder. Despite the fact that he held office for a quarter of a century, he was a committed Democrat, ensuring that free and fair elections were conducted every 5 years and winning them all. Our own chalk dust, confirming that calypso is the art of social commentary, consistently and publicly lambasted Williams in song at the annual Dimanche Gras Calypso King contest. When Williams's Women's League demanded that he be shut down, Williams retorted, "Let the jackass bray," upon which Chalk Dust promptly wrote a calypso on the subject with that title. As the founder of modern party politics in Trinidad and Tobago, Williams established the Women's League, deliberately encouraging the active participation of women in all facets of his party. At one point during a cabinet meeting, one of the male ministers used an expletive which was objected to by another because of the presence of women. Williams countered, "There are no women in my cabinet, only ministers." And he demanded seriousness. In an effort to institutionalize Trinidad and Tobago's 20th century invention of the steel band, and recognizing the movement for an incredible display of talent that needed to be harnessed, not only for the good of the young and marginally dispossessed who comprised it, but also to promote the cultural patrimony of Trinidad and Tobago, he said this to one of its representatives: "Mr. Critchlow, I'm going to be frank. I'm afraid that you will not like what I'm going to say. You asked me to meet the steel band boys, and we met 3 Sundays ago. We met, and assignments were given to some of you to report back here today. Where are the members of that subcommittee? Some of them are not here. But you bring a set of irresponsible people to take up 2 hours and 10 minutes of my time talking foolishness. And if I don't put an end to it, they will take up another 2 hours and 10 minutes of time talking more foolishness. I heard it said when I was in England that all Trinidad people like is old talk. I am not against the old talk, but not in my house." With much foresight for the Caribbean region, some 17 years before the European Economic Community, the EEC, the precursor to the EU, came into being, Eric Williams was championing a federation for the West Indies, understanding that each country standing alone was irrelevant in a global context. And he would be horrified and deeply chagrined at what is now taking place in the European Union, of what this portends for the unity of any particular region, and to paraphrase one Washington Post writer, for comity and commerce among peoples, and for the goal of being a multiplier of power and influence on the world stage. As an international statesman in 1969, Eric Williams was one of only 73 world leaders chosen to write a message to be placed on the moon by the Apollo 11 astronauts. The government and people of Trinidad and Tobago, he wrote, acclaim this historic triumph of science and the human will. It is our earnest hope for mankind that while we gain the moon, we shall not lose the world. Prior to Trinidad and Tobago's independence in 1962, the British offered a golden handshake, as they did to all of their newly departing colonies. But there was a caveat: the money had to be used to buy British goods. Williams was the only post-colonial leader to refuse it, claiming the quantum insufficient, the attached strings an insult, and invoking the specter of colonial exploitation and its relationship to the construction of the British economy. Here is what he said in a speech to West Indian students at the London School of Economics. "The West Indies are in the position of an orange. The British have sucked it dry, and their sole concern today is that they should not slip and get damaged on the peel. The offer is quite unacceptable, and we would prefer not to have it. It amounted to aid to Britain rather than to Trinidad. I do not propose to accept any concept of the Commonwealth, which means common wealth for Britain and common poverty for us. Williams's letter to that effect dropped like a bomb in 10 Downing Street. The battle lasted a full year, with him eventually capitulating, but not without first becoming a giant thorn in the British backside. He bucked the United States too over Chaguaramas, a peninsula in Trinidad that the British had leased to the Americans during World War II for 99 years in exchange for 50 warships. The site was needed as the headquarters of the short-lived West Indian federal government, and Eric Williams discovered that the transaction had not been ratified by the Trinidad and Tobago legislature. Thus, he wanted Chaguaramas returned to the people of Trinidad and Tobago forthwith. The Americans fought hard, and in fact, documents have been released under the U.S. Freedom of Information Act demonstrating that 2 times in non-consecutive years, the U.S. representatives in Trinidad and Tobago and the U.S. State Department were discussing removing Williams from office. As the then U.S. consul told the Secretary of State on one of these occasions, we must disengage with Williams and work for his ultimate demise. We do not know, as of this moment, what exactly demise meant, but we certainly know about Allende in Chile. This time, Williams won, and in addition to relinquishing Chaguaramas, the Americans proffered vital economic assistance in the form of significant infrastructure construction and a state-of-the-art arts and sciences college at the burgeoning University of the West Indies. Williams also challenged the Russians. In a 1975 visit to that country, he was so incensed by Russian insistence on a communique to be signed then and there, committing Trinidad and Tobago to ratifying the UN's Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, that he turned his back to the table and read a book during the official luncheon arranged by Foreign Minister Alexei Kosygin, who would later become Soviet premier. Throughout the visit, members of the Trinidad and Tobago delegation quipped nervously in preparation for deportation to Siberia. Its sub-zero temperatures could hardly have exceeded the freeze in relations between Williams and the Russians. The former matched his hosts head-to-head in both rudeness and discourtesy. He flatly refused to speak for the rest of the tour in Moscow and was openly dismissive of their blandishments, which ranged from a ride on the presidential plane to going fishing with Leonid Brezhnev, the supreme Soviet leader. The Russians suggested that Trinidad and Tobago should stick to what it did best, calypso and steel band, insufferable arrogance at its seamless best. It was not that Trinidad and Tobago objected to the lofty intentions of the treaty, but as Williams emphasized to the Russians, this fell under the purview of the government and parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, not him personally. Therefore, he could and would sign nothing. In sum, then, I am an unabashed admirer of Eric Williams, the scholar-politician. As a daughter, I cannot ignore either his foibles or his failures. But as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, as someone who believes that politics is still the art of the possible, and who is deeply familiar with the politics of today as it is being daily undermined in the United States where I live, I assert without fear of contradiction that Eric Williams is as critical to the success of this symposium as he was to Trinidad and Tobago as a nation state. Ken Gordon, editor of the Trinidad Express newspaper for many years during the Williams administration, and the founder of the Caribbean-wide CCN group, Ken Gordon, Williams's nemesis, had this to say about him in 2009, a full 28 years after his death. Many things have gone right for us as a country, and perhaps the most important one was having Dr. Williams emerge to preside over our politics in 1956 and lead us into independence. And that is a statement I never thought I would make, but one which, with hindsight, is undeniable. The creative and visionary management of our energy resources, our institutionalized commitment to the rule of law, the independence of the judiciary and of the press. These are the macro things and we must be everlastingly grateful for them. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to UWI's Heather Cato, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, to Director Vereen Shepard of the UWI Center for Reparation Research and the CARICOM Reparations Commission, for all of the staff that actually do the legwork and the slogging that it takes to bring us here today, for their recognition of my late father and his critical and enduring contribution to the subject. I close with an African proverb that is both powerful and poignant, and that speaks to me personally because of what I consider to be my life's work. Until the lions have their historians, tales of the hunt will continue to be about the hunter. Thank you.